yeah, there was a lot of synergy that happened in the browser industry, and
Mhm.
we are now sort of benefiting at the tail end of that because nowadays their standards are good. They match what browsers do for the most part. There are all these frameworks that abstract away most of the slightly sort of different idiosyncrasies of different browsers. Um, and what you're left with is just like a handful of boutique problems, such as people checking the user agent string. Uh,
Mhm.
so it's like it's better than it's ever been, but it's still annoying.
Right.
Um, and at the end of this whole thing, what's going to happen, whether we like it or not, is that we are going to have to start saying we are Ladybird, or are we Chromium? Perhaps a little bit of WebKit, maybe
Mhm.
HTML. Don't worry about it. Just send us something,
Right, right.
because that's what everybody ends up having to do.
Yeah. You have a lot of these browsers that are, especially the ones that are based on another toolkit, and they just say, well, like, I'm the Zen browser. Well, no, I'm actually Firefox. You don't need to know what Zen is. Just send me whatever Firefox is, or I think Brave just says it's Chromium. I don't think it actually has Brave in the user agent string. I might be mistaken there. But a lot of I know Vivaldi, for example, just says, I'm just Chromium. Just send me Chromium. Like, don't worry about anything else because, yeah, as you said, you start running into these just oddities that, frankly, you don't need to deal with. And it would be nice if we didn't have this user agent string here, and it was just like a thing that could be done away with. But
Yeah.
yeah.
In a way, building a browser is almost like building a bootleg video game console.
Mm.
That there are all these games out there, and they are just made for sort of the big consoles, right? And they maybe relying on something that isn't documented in the official PlayStation documentation or whatever.
Mm-mm.
But because the Sony PlayStation does a certain thing, then it's just expected that we do that as well. Um, so I don't know. I like to draw comparisons between game consoles and browsers because it's it's very similar as it turns out. And it might just be because I've built a lot of emulators. And it's just logical to draw the comparison.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, but yeah, uh, browsers are big emulators, and the web is just a big ROM collection.
Mm. I've never heard
It's
anyone describe it like that before.
it is kind of my mental model, and it's also the workflow is very similar because when you're building a game console, you have some game that you want to play,
Mm.
and then you're kind of just hacking on your emulator until you can see something happening in that game. You're
Mhm.
not worried about, like Donkey Kong racing or whatever. You're just trying to get Mario 64 to work.
Mhm.
Um, and so you're sort of building whatever's necessary for that specific thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and then you end up with something that's like capable of doing a lot of things that make that one thing work really well, but then somebody comes along and they throw a different game into it, and turns out, oh, we have to do all these other things.
Mhm.
And this is almost entirely how we've built Ladybird so far: is that people just try their own favorite websites and then decide that, oh, I'm going to make this work better. Um, or well, at least that's how we used to build it until we became a bit more test driven a
Right.
year ago or so.
I do definitely want to get into that, but I think we should get into more of just like the foundational of what the browser is first, and we can come back to that a bit later. So
Absolutely.
I guess the best place to start is what is the Ladybird browser? Like that, maybe that's a very broad question to go with. I think you know what? Let's start with why is it not based on any existing engine? Why are you sorry, my I trip over words sometimes. Why are you building an engine from scratch? Why are you not, doing what everybody else does and using something that's already out there?
Mm. So the reason for that has sort of evolved over time.
Mhm.
When we started on it, we just wanted a rich text display widget for Serenity OS. I wanted to be able to have bold and italic fonts in different sizes on
Mhm.
the same on the same line. Um, so it was very humble in the beginning.
Mhm.
But being an old browser developer, it just sort of predictably spiraled into, if I implemented this little piece of HTML, I might as well also add CSS, and I might add these other features, and why don't I put a JavaScript engine in it? Um, and in the beginning, it was just motivated by that, like just building a rich text widget for Serenity OS. And I guess it was maybe 6 months into it or something like that, where I started realizing that we should probably just call this a browser at this point because that's what it's evolving into. Um, and then it became more about like, let's see how far we can go, how far we can take it before we hit some kind of I don't know, like insurmountable friction. Um, and that day just never came, and we just kept pushing and improving it. And eventually, what happened was that it was originally part of the Serenity OS project. So Serenity OS is a mono repo with like all kinds of applications and a kernel and user land and everything developed in one Git repository. And what happened was we started building this browser, and eventually it was um, most of the daily development in the repo was just browser related, and it sort of
Right.
overshadowed the rest of the operating system in terms of activity. And um, I decided that it would be better to fork the project at that point, so that people who wanted to work on an operating system, do kernel stuff, they could live in peace in the Serenity repo, and they wouldn't have to worry about people like asking them to run all the browser tests whenever they were making changes.
Right.
And vice versa, like people working on CSS, they don't necessarily want to run device driver tests in the kernel if they're making changes. Um, so it grew out of that. And once we forked, then we started changing changing the rules, I guess, that were sort of established for Serenity OS, where the rules in Serenity OS were we build everything from scratch
Right.
ourselves, everything at home, no matter what. And when Ladybird was free to be its own thing, we decided that, we are just going to incorporate some popular open source libraries and not worry so much about implementing stuff like cryptography, compression, video codecs, stuff
Right.
like
Right.
that.
Right.
Stuff that's like far outside of our expertise that we were doing for fun, but not doing the best job of optimizing.
Right, and stuff.
Um,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Stuff that somebody else probably has written much better than you will. So
right.
just do their stuff.
Exactly, exactly. And so it just sort of organically evolved towards this point where, okay, well, now like a fledgling open source browser that leans on some of the best parts of the open source ecosystem. And um, what do we do now? Well, um, why don't we try to push this thing all the way and build a browser people could actually use instead of just toying around with it? So that sort of became a new motivation. Like, okay, let's build a real browser. Um, and then because of things happening outside of our little microcosm, the browser industry has been sort of consolidating on Chromium, as you mentioned, in recent years. Like people keep abandoning their browser engines and saying, "Hey, we can just build on top of Chromium,
Well,
and
it's
then we don't have
Chromium
to."
except for all of the
Yeah.
game consoles which are WebKit, which
Hmm.
leads to some. There's a lot of there's a lot of console hacking exploits because of old versions of WebKit they use.